Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what was the worst thing you saw inside the prison walls? Done 11 years myself. One of the worst things I've seen is two members of a gang called Goodfellas, aka 40 deep, jumped on a blood on the way back from bill call. One used a large knife. The other had a fan motor in a net bag and used that as a flail. Also seen/heard multiple people being raped. A friend of mine admitted to me after a year or so that he had been actively raped every night by his roommate, a ROOG from the Bloods, for about a 5-month period. There's more, just what I could think of ATM. That seems like a very animalistic and unsafe life. Yep, that's the nicest way I can voice my reaction to what you wrote. Wish we could all stop pretending prison is about rehabilitation. I spent 8 years in prison. In the state of Georgia. There was a guy who made a hustle of hiding illegal cell phones for the Mexican gangs. When a shakedown/search occurred, this man was responsible for the loss of many of those cell phones. He was confronted on the yard and tried to escape by climbing the fence. He got stuck in the razor wire, shredding his forearms, while 7 or 8 Mexican gang members were stabbing him all in the back of his legs and his ass. English female prison. I saw a woman get held down by 2 others, while a third woman proceeded to shove her hand up the woman's vagina to check if she had came in with a parcel. Drugs. This was in the communal showers, so yeah, addicts don't give a duck. Sounds horrifically painful. The complex trauma would never leave. Did they have any reason to think she had drugs? Likely try to check every new person. I made a friend early on who was sentenced to life for killing a man that had touched his niece. He'd been locked up for about 5 or 6 years when I'd first met him. Talked to him every day for 3 years, and one day he comes up to me and says he needs to talk to me about something. We do a lap on the back 40 and he tells me his old lady is leaving him and isn't bringing his daughter up to come see him anymore. He's actually crying. I didn't know what I could do to help him, so I let him cry and told him to not let it bother him. Maybe she'll come around. We go on about our day, and everything seems normal. That night he woke me up. He bunked across the hall, crying. I got up to talk to him, and he says he wants to die, and that he's glad I'm up, because he doesn't want to be alone. I start hitting the panic button for my cell, and screaming for a guard. But no one comes, and I have to watch while he pries his mirror off of his wall. He put on his linens and blanket like a big robe, and he cuts his stomach with his mirror. It was hard to see much because of the blankets and the dark, but I could smell his blood. Then he lit his blankets on fire. The cops got there when the smoke alarm went off, but they were too late. I still have nightmares about it, screaming for him to stop, to just talk it out, but he never does. I've seen a lot of ducked up shit, man, but this was probably the worst, or at least it stuck with me the longest. Edit. Thanks for the hugs and support, everyone. Makes how I feel after sharing hurt a little less. I appreciate it. I saw a guy get in a fight with his cousin over a 50-cent bowl. This escalated more and more until they starting fighting. We all kinda watched out the corner of our eyes. BC it was in the cell while the doors were open. Well, the guy that was pissed about the bowl grabbed the dude by the hair and bite a huge hunk of his cousin's eyebrow off. Like about half of it. If that wasn't bad enough, me and my cellmate moved into the cell. BC it was further away from the TV. So we are cleaning up the cell and my cellmate goes, holy duck, look at this. He lifts up what I thought was a dead hairy bug. Nope. Furry ass eyebrow and skin. Doesn't haunt me. Just crazy to think a guy lost half an eyebrow over a ducking 50-cent bowl. This type of thing really makes me wonder why I browse Reddit at night. Dad. I spent 6 years in prison. 1 month in I watched a crip on crip gang stabbing. They stabbed the guy 60+ times while he was curled up in a ball screaming help. But nobody could because you'd be a target next. He somehow survived, but I couldn't tell you how. I think about it every day. Random question. In movies/TV, they often depict people in a situation where they are forced to take sides, join a gang, or forced to participate in other crimes. How accurate is this? Suppose I went to prison, but I wanted to mind my own business, like stay in my cell, read books, talk to my cellmate, eat my food, etc. Stay out of gang stuff, don't pick sides, etc. How easy is it to just mind your own business? It's actually not that hard. What becomes difficult is when the slightest encounter turns into a confrontation. That does make you choose. But if you are simply there and will watch anything on TV or be okay with whatever is happening around you, it is pretty simple to keep to yourself. Saw someone break a small branch off a tree in the yard, dry it out in the sun, sharpen it down to a point on the concrete, and then stab a guy in the back with it 4 times. He had to be airlifted to hospital because it punctured his lung. Modern problems require Stone Age solutions. Modern solutions create Stone Age problems. Seeing someone on the threes jump to his death. Just missing PPL on the deck. Saw a guy try to kill himself. The block only had 2 tiers. He walked up the stairs and the phones were right at the top. He grabbed the hook and used it to climb on top of the phone with the side railing. He then leaned over the rail holding the hook and fell back. He just broke his back and did the rest of his bid/life in a wheelchair. Life with an extra dose of duck you. That's wild. It's not the craziest thing I saw, but it's a social norm in prison that goes on daily. I'll never forget how socially acceptable jackers were. Like somebody would be wearing a coat or hoodie etc and stare at a female CO and jack off. Sometimes sitting on a bench. Sometime the TV room. And nobody bats an eye. One time a dude was like, hey man, can you move a row over? She know him watching and didn't skip a beat, cranking off to an ugly 60 something years old woman. It's tucked up, but after a while you just accept that some people went nuts in there. In the Florida prison system. They used to call it gunning. I assume they still do. Though I've been out for a long time. Joe over there in the shower gunning Ms. Lewis down. Apostrophe. I remember people kinda turned on each other out of boredom. I mean, you made friends and all, but you had it hanging over you that you were a bad guy, and some people took to being assholes and provoked others seemingly out of boredom. It was an unpleasant situation to be on the other side because you wanted to stay out of trouble too, but at the same time had to stand up for yourself. Maybe not the absolute worst I saw, but something I remember. That sounds like high school, just more risk of being murdered. While not prison and certainly tame by comparison, the worst thing I saw in jail was refusal to allow people to use the restroom. We, 6 of us, were all waiting 12 hours for processing in a small town in NC and were put in a concrete cell with a toilet. Every time we stood up to use the toilet, an officer would yell at us to sit back down. For those who disobeyed, they were forcibly handcuffed and moved somewhere else, often pissing themselves during the ordeal. That sounds really cruel, if not illegal of the guards. I had a lawyer buddy who used to work for a court out in Nevada. He told me this. The prisoners who come through our court are like right here. Holds his hand out, low to the ground, to demonstrate that they are total low-lives. The guards who come through our court are like right here. Raises his hand like half an inch above the prisoners. Not a prisoner, but worked in a prison clinic for a few weeks while in med school. Was under the mentorship of the prison GP. Had this one guy come into the clinic for a routine visit who had a colostomy. We did our physical, blah blah, and the guy was about to leave. The GP mentoring me said, hey, check out his colostomy real quick. The guy awkwardly peeled part of his bag off, and he has these red blisters weeping fluid around his colostomy stoma. I was totally confused, and the guy left super quick. GP just shrugged. Later that day, I asked the GP what was up. Apparently the other prisoners dug that guy's colostomy hole, and he had gotten herpes of the colostomy from the other prisoners. Haunts me to this day. Can I please go back to the person I was before I read this? Dudes thinking no one notices their bedsheets ruffling during lights out. Saw this in a similar post. Some guy was doing a 2-year stretch for something. Anyway, he was laying awake his first night when he heard the microwave. He didn't think much of it and ignored it. Then a few minutes later he hears this blood-curdling scream. Apparently the guy using the microwave heated up a tub of Vaseline to boiling point, then he pours it on some guy's face. I think it was revenge for the guy talking smack about him. My uncle was in for 17 years for marijuana related charges. He was in a ward with 2 other guys with the same name as him. Both of them in for 7 years. One of them killed a guy and the other was a child molester. One day when my uncle was in the showers, a group of guys who mistaken him as a child molester were about to serve prison justice on the wrong guy. He quickly realized the situation, sprinted naked out the showers to grab his papers to show the guys they have the wrong dude. Cool story. I was a small-time criminal in my youth. Got locked up for some weed for the weekend. I never experienced much kindness that I could remember from people, but I did in jail. I couldn't use the bathroom in my cell because I was too scared, and these guys started talking to me and distracting me so I could go. It was the strangest and coolest thing I'd ever seen. Been intrigued by behavior ever since. I remember refusing to eat any food so I wouldn't have to use the bathroom in front of people. I didn't eat for 3 days because of it. That and no sunlight on my skin. I looked good when I got out. I was a prison guard, briefly, at an all-male prison in Virginia. It didn't suit me. I don't have enough testosterone, I guess. I just didn't like the entire process. I also couldn't get used to walking around on my own with 180 men. When I did rounds, the men were loose, just walking around watching. The stares were penetrating. If any of those guys grabbed me, I had no gun, no mace, nothing. And Virginia prisons will never negotiate with prisoners for the sake of a hostage. I'd have been screwed. It messes with your head a bit. But I still did it. Yeah. The food's gross, but the place was clean. The worst day for me was when one of the guards blew his brains out in the watchtower. He was in his early 20s. Not exactly prison, but how about being laughed at when asked to show a guard that your molar just broke in half with one part in your hand and the other profusely bleeding? I'll ask the dentist for an emergency visit. Paperwork came back for a visit in 6 months. Fuck Fresno County Jail. As a corrections officer, I've responded to, and in some cases prevented, suicides, typically by hanging, but sometimes cutting wrists, stabbing and beatings take place. Of course, there is always someone angry at someone. Fighting and bloody attacks at my facility were about once per week. Rape is less common than movies suggest, but there is very likely a sex for service trade going on somewhere, and every few months, 2 to 3 times a year, an inmate would use the tip line to report sexual abuse by another inmate. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you enjoyed watching this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below.